I'm Dan Sui, Vice President for Research and Innovation at Virginia Tech. I would like to welcome all of you joining us this morning to discuss the multiple implications of the recent SolarWinds attacks. As most of you might be aware, that's one of the largest, the most serious cybersecurity breaches in the recent history of the United States. 3 years ago, the Commonwealth of Virginia had the foresight to make a major investment to build a network of partners to launch the Commonwealth Cyber Initiative. This is a multi-million-dollar investment from the Commonwealth of Virginia. And the primary goal of CCI is to elevate the state-wide ecosystem of innovation and excellence in cyber physical systems with an emphasis on trust and security, and also to further secure the Virginia's role as a global leader in secure cyber physical systems. I'm very glad that we have CCI here to bring the best cyber minds across Virginia together to explain the impact of the SolarWinds breach and to help us what's next, what our innovation ecosystem can help us get there. So I would like to take this opportunity to thank Dr. Luis de Silva and his leadership team of 4 core directors. And they have been working with over 340 faculty members across 21 campuses in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And today's event is an embodiment of the spirit of CCI initiative and the goals that they are trying to accomplish. So with that, I would like to give you Dr. Luis de Silva to officially kick off today's webinar. Luis?
Thank you very much, Dan. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for that great introduction to CCI and to the team. I'm Luis de Silva. I'm the Executive Director of CCI. And I'm very happy to welcome all of you here today for this webinar about the SolarWinds hack and some of its implications. Our agenda is simple. We will start with a brief tutorial about what the hack was all about. And that will be followed by a panel of researchers throughout the Commonwealth who are involved in CCI's efforts that are relevant to the SolarWinds hack. I would like to tell you all that we're being recorded at the moment, and the recording will be available in the YouTube channel that's maintained by CCI. And by staying on, you're consenting to the recording of the event. So to get us started on some of the technical discussions and the description of what the SolarWinds hack was all about, I'd like to introduce Dr. Abdul Rahman. Abdul is CCI's Artificial Intelligence Testbed Director. He has a PhD in math and in physics from Howard University. He has broad expertise in artificial intelligence and cybersecurity, and he will tell us a little bit about the SolarWinds hack, how it came about, and what its impact is. Abdul, you have the floor.
Good morning, actually. How's everybody doing? I have several slides that I'd like to present to talk a little bit about SolarWinds. Can everybody see my screen okay?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, great. So what I'd like to do is give everybody a brief overview of SolarWinds. I think everybody has been briefed or has read. This has been extensively covered in the news. But just to give everybody a little bit of background, a hacker group believed to be affiliated with a foreign government, a nation state actor, gained access to certain environments within US government and commercial organizations. And this campaign lasted for several months. In fact, as we'll show in the timeline, it lasted for over 12 months, where initial activity to prepare was started actually exploiting these vulnerabilities. The attack involved compromising a company that's called SolarWinds, and they produce network applications and a monitoring platform called Orion. And we'll talk a little bit about how that happened, the line of attack, which is called an attack vector. And as you can see from their website, a number of their customers internationally in various market verticals, and the huge impact that this provides. Part of this introduction is to provide a little bit of background about how many of these attacks occurred, how they're architected, and how they are formed. As you can see, the level of seriousness that occurred several days after it was discovered, Department of Homeland Security released an emergency directive 21-01, which described advice and guidance on how to mitigate the compromise in the Orion platform. And as you can see, this happens not very often, but due to the huge impact within the public sector and private sector and the large number of corporations that were affected, this warranted an immediate mitigation of it because the compromise was so broad and vast. A little bit about the attack, and I've done my best to try to cite some of the sources where I've aggregated the material. Some specifics in terms of the platform that SolarWinds had. The versions were affected were here, 2019.4 through 2020.2. And what that really means is that the releases of this software from March 2020 through June 2020 may have contained what's called a Trojanized component. And it's basically a component that is, for all intents and purposes, appears to be the actual software element or subcomponent or library or executable, but within it is actually malicious software or what's called malware. The company called FireEye did some forensic investigation on all of the attacks, and they identified that in-depth planning and interaction was conducted for a while. One of the primary places of weakness, which we'll consider to be part of the supply chain, this is considered to be a supply chain attack, was in a dynamic link library, or what's called the DLL, and I'll talk a little bit about that. And this particular DLL, solarwinds.orion.core.businesslayer.dll, is distributed as part of the platform, and this was the particular DLL that was Trojanized. And essentially this component was digitally signed, and a backdoor was placed inside of it so that when you downloaded it, an adversary or bad actor or a hacker could get access to your system. And you saw the numbers of companies on the first slide and the number of agencies and organizations that were there. FireEye built an open source repository on GitHub, and it essentially tracks the elements of this attack in terms of signatures of it and in terms of being able to apply rules to your environment. And it's known as Sunburst, and I'll walk everybody through what's been done there. The key thing here is the Trojanized aspect, and part of the weakness in this particular platform reaching out to another server, pulling down a component, and that component actually looking like the right one, but not being the right one. This is a high-level view of the attack timeline. And around September 2019, what we'll call the threat actor, or TA, investigated this particular software platform, Orion, to assess its weaknesses. They injected, test code probably a week, within 1 to 2 weeks, and they started beginning some trial runs. Within 8 weeks, they had some test code running, and they had a compiled and deployed solution exploiting this weakness really within 4 to 5 months, and they deployed it. Now, the interesting thing is that every software platform releases updates. You know, Windows has updates, your platform has updates, and these are sometimes referred to as fixes or security updates. But in this case, there were hot fixes to the Orion platform. And so these hot fix DLL updates were available to customers. And note that these DLLs really were pushing Trojanized software so that backdoors could be implemented. Now, once those backdoors were implemented, these particular TAs had access to the systems, and then to remove or to become undetected around things like antivirus or other detection capabilities through endpoint or EDR, they actually remove these DLLs so that upon scanning, they would not identify a weakness here. Now, from February, March timeframe, all the way through December, this was essentially undetected. Or if it was detected, no one really identified it. And so on the 12th of December, SolarWinds was notified of this particular exploit. 2 days later, SolarWinds notified its shareholders, and then by the 17th of December, the US CERT issued its alert. And at that point in time, I think everybody was pretty much alerted to the fact that this was a huge compromise that was undetected for many months. I want to talk a little bit about how this happened, or some of the background with which this occurs, right? So part of the Trojanization of a DLL or dynamic link library occurs when certain software built on Windows requires certain code to run. And they're compiled not as executable files, but as libraries that other applications can run, like Internet Explorer or Notepad. And so these files are a means for developers to use share code and data to upgrade functionalities, relink and recompile applications. And in many cases, a single DLL could be used by different apps. They could share the same DLL, as in this case, you see MSN Messenger and Internet Explorer sharing the IE proxy.dll. And typically these, DLLs are updated, and a lot of the dependencies are handled on the back end. But in the case where you have something that's named IE proxy.dll, but actually has malware embedded in it, it could be problematic for any application that's using it, particularly in the case where there's a backdoor implemented. This is from the Microsoft website, and I just wanted to point out a couple findings. This is not that old, but essentially when you load these DLLs, when you run some software, this code or this data is required to run the application. So DLLs are necessary to run the applications like Outlook or Word or Excel. And really part of this is there's a very specific order that some of these DLLs need to be loaded in order for these applications to run right. And so there's some very unique subtleties here that people that are very sophisticated actors within the hacking realm are aware of. One of the first ones, which is the first red arrow all the way at the top, is that applications can control the location from which a DLL is loaded. And part of this is you don't necessarily need to reference the same file location for loading the DLL. And this causes the ability to shift where those DLLs are referenced from, as long as the names are the same. The other part is that if the DLL is already loaded in memory, the system only checks for redirection. And this is critical for a standpoint of, you have a system that's up and running, you don't need to reload a DLL, and this is for efficiency purposes to keep, the timing kind of low when you run an application without having persistence delays. The list of known DLLs is stored in the registry. So if you modify the registry key, which is at the third arrow at the bottom, you can actually change what DLLs are referenced or actually stored on the particular machine. And one of the keys are the dependencies are searched by name. So if you take all of these into account and you want to make the best go of exploiting a particular system that runs Windows, these are considerations for how you can exploit particular weaknesses in certain software, in particular for supply chain attacks. So just to kind of give an overview for SolarWinds, which is sometimes SolarGate, you're essentially looking at what we'll call a compromise at the DLL level. So the attackers look for a software development distribution pipeline where we're actually pulling down a DLL that's needed to run the platform. And because we know that there is one particular DLL or several DLLs that the Orion platform needs, we can actually compromise that by injecting malicious software into it, but just with the same name. So notice in the previous slide, only the names are referenced in terms of checking in most cases, especially if the system's been up. Now, once that backdoor has been attained and you do have the ability to get into a system, most of these TAs or threat actors can, when the application starts running and you double click your app, you load the DLL, you've loaded up your backdoor, it can connect to a command and control server. And now that server really can remote desktop into that machine. They've handled all the protocol connections, and it's just like that they were surfing around right on their regular computer. They can gain hands-on keyboard attack right on premises. The backdoor gives them the ability to steal credentials, to escalate privileges, and then finally, they're able to continue to traverse laterally to steal additional privileges, which may be on premises or within the cloud. So this is how this kind of the anatomy of the attack occurred way back in September of 2019. And these are some of the details, and we kind of walked through it a little bit in the previous slides. One of the unique things about SolarWinds is that it only calls out for an update every 14 days. So in 2 weeks, it retrieves and executes commands called jobs, and that has the ability to transfer files, execute files, profile the system, reboot the machine. It's kind of like remote management. So the Orion platform gives you the ability to remote manage other customer environments. So it's like computer to computer interaction. And you essentially can do all of this without any interruption in service and across those huge numbers of customers. And so this backdoor, once implemented, also utilized many obfuscated techniques to avoid antivirus tools and forensic tools that endpoint detection and response, so that it could go undetected for a lot of many months. The update file was a standardized installer patch file. It included all kinds of compressed resources, but the key thing is that they went after one particular element that, once named the same, no one would know that there was a difference in there, or at least the controls that were in place did not detect it. After a dormant period, the malware will try to resolve the subdomain to beacon out to its command and control, or what's known as C2. And essentially, the DNS response will give back a name so that this communication can go through. And then once that happens, all the connectivity as described in the previous slide can occur. So this is some of the details of how the attack occurred. But essentially, once that backdoor was in place, they maintained a type of behavior that would emulate normal communication. So they didn't immediately start communicating out on day 2 or day 3, because Orion doesn't do that. Orion behaves in a manner where they have regular communications of certain sizes every 14 days. And that gives a great deal of I guess, confidence in people that are monitoring the network to say, oh, Orion is just communicating in its normal 14-day pattern, not knowing that the payload that they're communicating is actually exfiltration of data or sending credentials. This is a little bit more detail. It goes into sort of the technical details of once you have the backdoor in place. In step 1, there is a connection to a bad domain, and that bad domain is essentially proxied by threat actors to allow for the initial portion of command and control. Once command and control is established, step 2, certain scripts, certain components, certain elements, certain other malware is deposited on the machines to establish the foothold. In step 3, a modification of the registry is made. Now, remember, I alluded to the fact that the registry update was about where you can reference the full list of DLLs and their location. And so it's important to note that if you modify the registry, the system will, in fact, go forward and do things based upon that registry identification. Now, there's other registry keys that control logging, that control auditing, and many of those keys were also disabled so that the logs would not show up that the system's been tampered. DLL host.exe in step 4 had the ability to create processes. In step 5, you could actually run certain scripts to gain access and to expand your foothold, move laterally. You could also write in your own registry key, a debugger. And then in step 7, you have full access to whatever platform customer is there. And this all happened very, very quickly. It was tested in their lab. And back in September, October and November, over that 8-week period, much of this was through trial and error, determined was in the realm of possible, and then finally weaponized to be deployed in February. As I mentioned, FireEye, the cybersecurity company, developed a GitHub repo, of which here's a couple of screenshots for some of the countermeasures. And really the countermeasures are some of the rules that you could deploy, snort rules or Yara rules. IOC stand for indicators of compromise, or if you have what's known as CLAM antivirus, you could deploy these rules that could actually impede or add additional logging to traffic that would identify the Sunburst or SolarWinds hack in terms of traffic moving across. None of these rules were in place in most of these environments, so this particular backdoor was put in place, and it really bypassed a lot of these any of the protections that existed there, and that was by intent and by design. So this is an open source repo. After FireEye reported it, they basically put all of these IOCs up there so that the community could download them and they could protect themselves. As you can see, DHS and the CERT provided a security advisory, and part of this security advisory, they also mentioned that additional backdoors could have been put into environments, and some of these backdoors were common malware loaders, and 2 of them are listed here. They're circled in red. One of them is called Teardrop, and the other one's called Raindrop. And these could be deployed on the environment, as I mentioned, sort of in the workflow, as secondary tools to load additional malware into the environment as well. So once you have the main compromise on a particular machine, what your antivirus may do is identify Teardrop. They would identify and mitigate Teardrop and then remove it, but all the while the backdoor compromise for full access to the environment was fully available. So again, this is part of the symptom of saying, hey, we had some malware deployed, we don't know where it came from, Teardrop and Raindrop exist on some servers, let's go on ahead and quarantine and remove that. And maybe some months later, these additional pieces of malware that may not be detected are deployed, but it's only because rules exist for Teardrop and Raindrop that they were detected. But I'm sure that there's many other attack vectors that exist within a lot, as well as some additional malware and intrusion sets that exist in these environments that's not been detected, but these are just standard off-the-shelf components, the equivalent of things that you could just buy and download to load up other malware. So once access was maintained, you could use whatever implants you want to gain access or to compromise even more. And just to make it easy, once they had their initial vector into the environment, they didn't need to invest a lot of time to rebuild or reinvent the wheel, so to speak. So one of the first things that they did was they got this malware loader called Teardrop. They essentially did the equivalent of adding kits that would increase and escalate privileges, the equivalent of like a rootkit, and they were able to gain substantial amount of access to environments, understand traffic, understand assets, understand terrain, and like I said, if it was mitigated, they could just redeploy it or redeploy another variant of it. In a second case, you have another custom type A DLL, which may not have a signature, may not be able to be detected, and it would have code, it would have data, and it could do other things that are desired. So these are kind of the cases where now that we've established a foothold, now that we have a backdoor, let's go on ahead and continue to exploit the environment as much as we can. And so I'm at my last slide, kind of giving an overview of the attack, just to kind of go through it. The findings here really make it clear that while they relied on many different attack vectors, the core DLL was with SolarWinds. It focused, that was the core of the operation. Their sophistication would be relegated to the fact that they could methodically avoid indicators of compromise. They could avoid current antivirus and other EDR capabilities. They could camouflage tools and binaries. They could mimic existing files to be undetected for many months. They disabled audit polling. They disabled other registry keys that controlled access within different systems so that they would not trigger a log or an event. They created special firewall rules to minimize the outgoing traffic for certain protocols to not raise awareness. They could cut down on the noise and the traffic after they perform their reconnaissance. They could execute extensive lateral movement after they gain control of the environment. And they were able to change the timestamps on many of the artifacts and really utilize a lot of these complex wiping procedures so that all of their malicious implants could not be discovered. I think overall, what this demonstrates is a need for greater awareness on how nation state and threat actors go about exploiting not just supply chain attacks, but environments. And I hope this can provide some level of concern and seriousness that then gets translated into deeper policy to raise more awareness on cybersecurity. So with that, are there any questions? Or I'll turn it over to Luis to, I guess,
Thank you very much, Abdul, for this very detailed, description and very clear description. We're going to move on to our panel, but if anyone has any questions, I would ask that you use the Q&A box, and then we will try to get to those questions if time allows, during the panel and shortly after. But to lead the panel, I'd like to introduce Dr. Laura Freeman. So Laura is a faculty member in the Department of Statistics at Virginia Tech, and she has a PhD in statistics also from Tech, and she's a member of the Hume Center as well as of CCI, and she'll moderate this panel of very distinguished CCI researchers who are involved in cybersecurity research. So Laura, you have the floor.
Thank you, Louise, and it's an honor to host this panel today of cybersecurity experts. So the plan is we have a few prepared questions, and as Louise said, if there's time, we'll try and get to your questions in the Q&A. But what I've asked each of the panelists after I introduce each of them to talk about is their reflections to learning about the SolarWinds hack and what concerns it raised for them. I'll start off by introducing Dr. Jack W. Davidson, who is a professor of computer science in the School of Engineering and Applied Science and the director of the Cyber Defense Program of Study at the University of Virginia. Dr. Davidson's research interests include compilers, computer security, programming languages, computer architecture, and embedded systems. Jack, over to you for your opening comments. And you're muted.
The typical Zoom error there. Thanks, Laura. It's a real pleasure to be here today to discuss the SolarWinds attack. As Dr. Rahman discussed, SolarWinds breach was a serious supply chain compromise. It compromised a software development pipeline to introduce a Trojan into a component of a widely used product. And this raises a number of concerns. One, the first question is, have other major software development platforms been compromised? Do we know? I mean, we saw that these attackers were very sophisticated and were able to hide. And I'm sure, they potentially compromised other ones. I think the other one is that it showed that software supply chain compromise are often not a cybersecurity priority, but it should be. Many companies are transitioning to from DevOps models to DevSecOps, which focuses on the security of the applications, and that's incredibly important. But typically, the security of the development environment has not been a high priority. And again, I think, this attack just showed the power of a supply chain attack. I mean, by compromising one supplier, many consumers are affected. And I think it also illustrates the asymmetric nature of cybersecurity, where the advantage the attackers have, one vulnerability allows them to compromise many systems. So, yeah, I think, this was a kind of a wake-up event for cybersecurity folks.
Great, thank you. Next up, we have Dr. Wenjing Liu, who is a WC English Endowed Professor of Computer Science and a Professor of Electrical and Computer Engineering at Virginia Tech. Dr. Liu's research interests focus on privacy protection techniques in networked information systems and cross-layer security enhancements in wireless networks. Wenjing, over to you.
Thanks, Laura. Thanks for having me here. So I think this SolarWinds attack is certainly, an example of an APT attack, right? So advanced persistent attack. And it's a highly sophisticated, highly intelligent, and it's a stealthy, right? So I think there are two things that strikes me the most about the attack. The first is that the attack actually exploits the software supply chain, right? The software update mechanism. So we know the software update mechanism is supposed to be a security mechanism to keep system updated and to install the security patches. But in this case, it's used to attack, right? So it's a first step to spread the Trojan and to get a system infected. So I guess more attention need to be paid on, the software, a secure software supply chain. And also, I think I'm concerned on the how sophisticated the attack is and the scale of its impact, right? So the attack was well carried out to minimize the risk of exposure, right? So, and it stayed stealthy for a very long time, for months, right? And ultimately leading to extensive impact. So if we look at the number of the organizations impacted, and the length of the attack remain undetected, and the amount of information stolen, which actually still has not been fully determined, right? So this level of sophistication is alarming. So yeah, so that's, I think, reminds us, some importance of, the cyber security or cyber defense. All right, Laura, back to you.
Thank you, Wenjing. Next, our next panelist is Dr. Jim Jones, who serves as the director and digital forensics lead for George Mason University's Department of Homeland Security Center of Excellence for Criminal Investigations and Network Analysis. Dr. Jones conducts research in cybersecurity and digital forensics. His analyses focus on looking backwards in time to understand cyber attacks, find malware infections, detect system and device misuse, and recover lost data. Jim, over to you.
Great, thanks, Laura. So the first impression I had after hearing about SolarWinds was the inevitability of it. We have watched increasing connectivity over the last couple of decades. And so an enterprise of any size depends on a lot of external connections. I used to do pen testing in the early 2000s. And for example, at oil and gas facilities, it was kind of rare to find a connection across the OT and the IT networks. Now that's common. It would be funny if you didn't find some type of a connection between the two networks, even a protected one. So that the fact that we depend on all these external parties and one of them was exploited is not a surprise. If you trace back a little bit, Home Depot was compromised through an HVAC contractor. OPM was compromised through a third-party contractor. So the attackers are going to continue to use the weakest link that they find. And in addition to humans, one of those weakest links are these third parties. We're only as strong as the third parties. The takeaway from that is twofold. One, there is no perfect system. So no matter how much work we put into securing the supply chain, and we absolutely should do all of those things, attacks are still going to happen. And so monitoring our networks for signs of intruders is still a critical step. That's actually really hard to do. The SolarWinds attackers were sophisticated and they were variable. They did not use the identical playbook repeatedly, which is one of the ways that we tend to find attackers doing that. And then the second takeaway is the opportunity for potential disruption. So another part of my life is spent trying to connect the dots on attacker organizations and enterprises. And so the ability to connect the dots for an attacker network, to understand their infrastructure and the tools, and to see the attack coming a bit before it actually hits, is the stepping back a few months or weeks would be to an advantage. Those are kind of the two takeaways and first impressions.
Great, thanks, Jim. And our final panelist today is Dr. Hong Yuwu, who is the Batten Chair of Cybersecurity and the Director of the Center for Cybersecurity Education and Research at Old Dominion University. Dr. Wu is a professor in the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering and holds a joint appointment in the Department of Computer Science. His research focuses on networked and intelligent cyber-physical systems for security, safety, and emergency management applications. Over to you, Hong Yi.
Well, thank you, Laura, and thanks, Abdul, for this detailed and insightful explanation of the attack. My initial reaction to the news was that it's really too bad that the attack impacted so many systems and for so long. This is not the first software supply chain compromise, and it's not going to be the last one. My big concern is that the attack might be just a tip of iceberg. The overall attack technique is not fundamentally new, and it looks like a similar strategy could be used to attack other systems as well. So how many attacks have happened before but never been reported and discovered, and how do we reduce the chance that it will happen again? A fundamental problem with the supply chain attack is that our software systems are growing larger and more sophisticated. It's just impossible for anyone to develop the codes and to maintain the software only by himself. So for example, developers use third-party codes, right, during the development. And as end users, we rely on patches and updates to ensure our system is healthy and up-to-date. So those are all good practice from the system development and maintenance perspective, but they do create opportunities for the attackers to initiate such supply chain attacks. So this could be even worse in the near future as AI is rapidly integrated into our computer systems. AI is an effective tool for automation, but at the same time, it's so sophisticated and a lack of interpretability. So it's opening new vulnerabilities, it's enabling new attacks. I believe that it's going to be the main target in the future supply chain attacks. And it's my current research focus. For instance, I currently have a project funded by CCI to study this problem, aiming to get better understanding of the possible attacks and the mitigation techniques in the neural space, and to make sure that we are very well prepared for securing the future intelligent cyberspace.
Thank you, Hong Yi. That's a great lead into our next question, which is how can organizations like CCI, which we are all part of, help secure these future technologies? So you brought up AI. There's a lot of other technologies coming down the pipeline, getting us more network. I'm curious as to your perspective on how to do that and your particular role in advancing cybersecurity. So Wenjing, I think you're going to lead us off on this one.
All right, so I think we're seeing increasing number of the cyber attacks and also increasing level of sophistication of the attacks, right? So organizations like CCI can certainly play an important role in helping secure the nation's IT infrastructure, particularly on bringing together security researchers in different domains and carry out interdisciplinary research. One of the security principles is defense in depth, right? So where you take a layered approach to protect your system, protect your information, and unsuccessful attack like a SolarWinds usually need to take multiple steps, like Abdul just mentioned, right? So there's a chain of attack actions. So it needs to get the system initially infected, needs to make a lateral movement to obtain user credentials with the right priority to access the sensitive data, to exfiltrate sensitive data, right? So if we can stop it in any of the critical steps, then we can effectively mitigate or contain the attack. For example, many of us in CCI are working in different security areas and are using different approaches, right? So in the system and software security area, people are developing secure software and the system that follows a least privilege principle. And they are implement better compartmentalization. And those can effectively mitigate the attack, right? Make it harder for the attacker to find a way to escalate its privilege and to make a lateral movement. So this is also useful to contain the attacker in case of a failure, right? And the same rule applies to network systems. So we need better data and network flow separation. External facing network components need to be properly separated from internal components, and network segmentation and firewall parameter policies need to be followed so that the application traffic is restricted to pre-approved domains, right? And then in the upcoming 5G network, authentication, network slicing, all become a very important topic to network security researchers. And I think we also need effective detection mechanisms, right? So this is particularly important to APT attack, where the attackers try to stay stealthy. So intrusion detection systems, particularly behavioral-based monitoring and detection can cover the gap when authenticated user, but who is compromised, right, start to abuse its right. We also need a good recovery mechanism once the attacker is detected, how to respond quickly to a detected attack, how to recover from the damage, and how to trace back to the attacker and identify the past malicious events and hold the attacker accountable, right? So those are all important steps and need different sets of expertise. So my point is that, the cyber defense is a shared responsibility of all. And we can build more effective multi-layer defense when collaborating with people in different domains. So I think I will just stop here.
Back to Jack, do you have do you have a follow-up?
Sure. I mean, I'd like to, I'll highlight one of the research projects that I think illustrates how the Commonwealth Cyber Initiative can really help. So we currently have a research project that's a joint effort between the University of Virginia and Virginia Tech. It's a 4-year, $9 million effort that's focusing on developing techniques to detect network compromises as early as possible. And the key idea is that you will leverage information from multiple networks to detect attacks that are invisible from the perspective of an isolated network. But when you have data from multiple systems that share the right data, you know, like I said, this kind of effort where we're sharing data is just not possible unless we collaborate. And that's one of the things that, you know, CCI, you know, is doing, is bringing together, you know, the great research universities at Virginia to work together to do these projects that are just not possible unless we collaborate. I mean, the other thing that we're trying to do is also transition some of our efforts, past research to, you know, practice. You know, typically, you know, practice trails, obviously research, it takes, you know, 4 or 5 years before research starts to appear in practice. We had participated in this, it was called the DARPA Cyber Grand Challenge, and developed some technologies. And we're currently working with Red Hat and IBM to try to transition, you know, those technologies. So there's just, you know, across the Commonwealth, there's a huge number of, you know, efforts, both research and also, you know, commercialization.
Hey, Laura, if I could add a comment there. So we've been doing research on residual digital fragments of files. So when you delete a file on a system, the contents don't go away immediately, and often there are bits and pieces lying around a hard disk or USB stick, for example. And for CCI, we've been looking at this in the context of autonomous vehicles, post-accident or post-attack. What kind of fragments might still be lying around that could tell us about the attack? And if we think back to, or put this in the SolarWinds context, we know the artifacts, and researchers very quickly produced a nice list of, here are the full artifacts that you can find on a system, and you know SolarWinds was here. The interesting extension of that is what happens when the attacker leaves and just turns it off, and or tries to clean up their mess before they leave, which has happened in the past. And so the work that we're doing would go to finding those partial artifacts, the residual pieces, and reasoning over them to say, yeah, this system was compromised, and here's what we can infer from those pieces.
Yeah, I think
yeah, jump in.
Yeah, I really fully agree with other panelists. Overall, I have observed in the past couple of years, CCI creates such great cross-pollination opportunity, right? Such cross-pollination can be between different disciplines that are relevant to cyber. Cybersecurity is such an interdisciplinary area. We have seen funded by CCI researchers from computer science, engineering, political science, you know, psychology, right? Working together, and laws and ethics working together to solve the problem. It also means the collaboration between researchers across different institutions in Virginia, and also between academia and the industry and the government. For instance, we currently have a projects partially funded by CCI, and it allows us to work with industry and work with research labs in the Army and the Navy. So it's really important, right, to have such cross-pollination in order to fully understand the cybersecurity problems and develop holistic approach to solve those problems. So I'm really excited to be part of the CCI team to facilitate such collaboration, you know, in Hampton Roads area and also statewide.
Thank you. So I think that circles back to one of the things that the SolarWinds attack really illustrated, is the big challenges governments and large organizations overall face in securing their infrastructure. So I'm curious as to your perspective on what are those biggest challenges that the government or large industries face. And Jim, I'll turn it over to you to lead off.
Sure, thanks, Laura. I think the government challenges can be put into two buckets that are related to each other. The first is that the attack surface is growing monotonically. And the attack surface is our term for all the ways that an attacker might get into a network or a system. And so when you think about trying to protect a computer 20 or 30 years ago, it was in a data center and you controlled access and limited network connectivity and so on. Now, you know, the pipelines have embedded systems, computers out there in the middle of a field somewhere, and we're supposed to protect that because it's also a computer and it's got a network connection back to headquarters and so on. So that whole attack surface picture is growing. And the other piece of it is the impact of a successful attack is growing. So increasingly our critical systems are computerized, they're interconnected. And so any attack on a piece of that affects a critical system. instead of just somebody's laptop or something like that. When we think about risk and cybersecurity, we put those two pieces together. What is the likelihood of a bad thing happening, and what's the impact when it does happen? And they compound each other. And right now, both of those pieces are growing. And so the big challenge for government, and in fact, any enterprise, is how do you stop the growth of those two factors? And in fact, how do you reduce one or more of them to reduce the overall risk?
Thanks. Jack, do you have thoughts here?
Yeah, so definitely agree with Jack. Just, one little anecdote. I was at a government meeting where the high-level official in DHS was talking, and he was just lamenting the fact that how things have changed now, where even a refrigerator can be a source of an attack. So, it's absolutely right. The kind of threat surface has grown. I think the other thing, that's a big challenge for government, and this is, again, something that CCI is working on, is workforce development and getting people that are trained and ready, to kind of tackle these problems. There's, just a huge shortage of this. We're again, the Commonwealth's in a great position because of Northern Virginia and government. There's just, a ton of jobs there. I think a lot of our students want to return home. And so there's some great opportunities. In fact, just yesterday on our CCI fellows call, we were talking about a cyber boot camp that, is going to be run for students, and, getting them, you got to start early. You got to build this pipeline of people up, as early as you can. And so there, this is, again, just, I was really excited to hear about that activity. And I think these kinds of things are, really important, not just for the Commonwealth, but, for our nation. So it's really exciting to see those things happening.
Thanks. Wenjing, did you have something to add here?
Yeah, I think I fully agree with Jim and Jack. So I think the government and company need to sort of control the growing attack surface. So some security policies might be helpful, but I also think they need to tighten their security management, right? So in addition to the basic security training for general employees, I think they need a dedicated security officer, because the attack are getting more and more sophisticated. So if we look at the SolarWinds attack, right? So there's a reported like the weak FTP password in 2019 by this company, and there's a loss of certificate signing keys, right? So this is a fundamental failure for security management, because this is the certificate signing key is the root trust in software supply chain systems, right? And also seems no one in that company is watching for the software updates they send out and they put on the website. I would think, if they have a strict security policies where they can do a simple verification of the software checksum, then they will detect there's a altered, the software, right? So yeah, I think they just need to tighten the security management, maybe put more investment, hire a dedicated chief security officer to help with that.
Thanks.
Yeah, just and to the concern on the attack surface, right? Just looking at our cyberspace, it's exposed to such a broad and complex attack surface nowadays. And the internet has no boundary. Attackers can come in and launch attacks through many different ways. Mm-hmm. I was wondering, right, is there a well-defined government system to protect our cyberspace? Who is our border control to protect our cyberspace in the US? It seems that right now it's all up to individual private companies and the individuals, right, to defend ourselves. And if you look at the other end, right, when an attack like this happened, and when we try to go after the cyber criminals, there is a boundary. You cannot go into another country and do the investigation and collect the information as you want. So how do we ensure a global collaboration under a well-defined legal framework? I think that's a big challenge for our government.
Yes, very much so. And so transitioning to the next question, what are the most important things that academia can be doing to help advise on this? So are there things we should start doing that we're currently not doing in academia, or things that should be more widespread? And Hong Yi, I'll send it right back to you.
All right. So academia is making very important contributions, right, to securing our cyberspace by doing what it is good at, right? For example, in Virginia, many universities have launched various cybersecurity degree programs to strengthen the cybersecurity workforce development. For instance, I'm with ODU. We have created the cybersecurity program back in 2015. Over the past 5 years, we developed the BS, MS, and Doctor of Engineering in Cybersecurity. It was the enrollment growing from 11 to over 900. I don't have data from other institutions, but there is a very similar trend in the expansion of the cybersecurity program in the Commonwealth and in the nation. And with the support of the CCI, I would say that this process of expanding cybersecurity workforce development is going to be accelerated down the road in the next few years. So that will be a very important contribution. On the other hand, academia playing a critical role, right, to do cutting edge research in understanding cybersecurity, fundamental cybersecurity problems, the potential attacks, right, especially as new attacks, new problems, and the corresponding mitigation solutions. In the area of cybersecurity, I really think that this academia should work closer with industry, because the industry has a first-hand information about the cyber systems, about the attacks. They have the data, right? They have the real world, they know the real world problem, and they have the real world data. So this is important. And the collaboration with industry will allow academia to do better, right? And strengthen our in both of the research and the workforce development perspective. And at the same time, it will allow academia to transfer our research findings into practice quicker and easier. In this perspective, I think CCI is doing an excellent job to stimulate collaboration between academia and the industry. And I anticipate that with the support of CCI, more and more cyber researchers in the Commonwealth will work with industry partners and get their research implemented in the real world systems.
Excellent, thank you. Other thoughts?
I'll just add one. I agree with everything was said there. I mean, research and collaboration with industry. I think the other thing that I think academia could do more of is work with the what I'll call the public sector, government, and those kinds of things. I mean, because of this technology is so important to everything we do, banking, but also, being a citizen. And, of course, we've all read about the election security and that kind of thing. And so I think there's some real opportunities for the universities to work with government, to secure this, vital infrastructure. There's a initiative going on in the Commonwealth called the Cyber Navigator Initiative, where we're looking at working with the Board of Elections to help communities in the Commonwealth, especially small counties that don't have a cybersecurity expertise, to secure their activities. And so those kinds of things, I think, definitely like to do research, but I think we also need to start thinking about how we can kind of give back to the community.
Yeah, and that's a great way for data pathways to inform that research too.
Yeah.
So, Jim, I see you popped off mute.
Yeah, I think just a quick comment. I think our challenge in academia is to continue teaching the technical foundations, but also teach the applied hands-on piece of it. Any of us who took chemistry in college, for example, you never took a chemistry class that didn't have an associated lab. You apply the theory in the lab, and we need to do the same thing. It's just not hard required right now, and I think that's one of our challenges.
Jing, anything to add to close this one out?
Yeah, I think I agree with everything that has been said. And I think academia is really good at design sophisticated but very often complex defense mechanisms, right? So it's important that the academia people can talk to industry and government to sort of understand how they actually implement the security solutions, what are the costs or the major hurdles of deploying a solution, and the usability of the solution. So I think that will help us to develop more practical solutions.
Yeah, the design for security, the aspects you're raising there, that's great. And so that's a good lead into our next question. And one of the things we've reflected on a lot today is that these systems or organizations, even cities, are becoming increasingly networked and complex. How does this increasing software-enabled technology, and Hanji brought up AI earlier, and networking capabilities, and CCI we look at 5G, how is all of that changing the cybersecurity landscape, and what are the important research implications? So I'll turn it over to Jack to lead us off on this one.
Yeah, so I think, we've touched on some of these issues. I'll just, focus on the complexity of these systems that we're building these days. And again, this attack surface. One of the, I guess, again, security mantras is, has always been kind of, you secure the perimeter, and then once you're inside, then everything's okay. I think the SolarWinds attack showed us, that's just not the case. And so I think, we need to rethink some of the, ways we've thought about cybersecurity, this kind of Maginot Line or, just doesn't work anymore. And so rethinking, how we do things, there used to be this, mantra, trust but verify. And I think the new mantra needs to be never trust, always verify. So yeah, just, rethinking things given the new landscape, I think, and that's something, again, academia can do, whereas companies, I think, often just can't.
Hong Yi?
Well, yeah, I will probably just comment on the AI side, right? So AI is becoming such a critical part of our modern software systems, right? It becomes pervasive and embedded into many applications. For example, for the face recognition, medical diagnosis, computer vision, self-driving vehicles, you can name. And many of those AI-empowered applications are even life critical. So AI is so powerful, but it's also highly sophisticated. And in some sense, it's not very easily explained, right? People have found it works, but they don't really fully understand why it works so well. So it's extremely difficult to systematically examine the trustworthiness and the security of the AI system or AI-empowered engineering systems. So we currently have a CCI-funded projects to investigate the existing and the emerging neural backdoor attacks. That is one of the most serious attacks towards the AI systems. We are exploring effective backdoor detection schemes, and once detected, how to remove those backdoors, right? To clean the model to make sure that it's acceptable and it's safe in the engineering systems. So we have got some initial results, very exciting, and reported those results in a couple of recent conferences. For example, last year in the ACM Multimedia and this year in NDSS. So, and furthermore, that's really thanks to the CCI framework. So we currently are working with industry partners to go even deeper into the problem space and possibly commercialize the research and apply them in the real world systems. So it's really exciting. It's a very challenging problem, but really exciting.
I was going to ask you if anyone was reading your conference papers, but that's great. So Wenji, what perspective do you bring to this?
Yeah, I think like many technologies that those technological advances has changed our life in many positive ways, right? But also very often, right, the technology advances also bring a sort of unintended, the negative consequences. I think Hong Yi brought up a very good example, like the AI, and especially AI used in security, right? So it's we have seen AI used for security, like AI-based, machine learning-based anomaly detection, machine learning-based vulnerability detection to help security, right? But on the other hand, the machine learning or AI can also be used to counter security, like the adversarial machine learning. So there's a lot of research on adversarial machine learning, right? So the research and already shows that the attacker can poison the training phase of the AI model and to generate a very unreliable AI model. And they can also add very small perturbations in the testing data, right? So that they can mislead well-trained model into making, the wrong decisions, right? So there's a lot of work that has been done. So I think there's an even debate on whether the introduction of AI is to the advantage of attacker or to the advantage of the defender, right? So yeah, I think I completely agree with you know, the Hong Yi, the AI security, AI safety, trust AI. It's an important topic area, and it needs more research and so to answer all those questions.
And Jim, can you close us out?
Sure, I have a quick bad news, good news pairing as well. Bad news, the thing that I worry about beyond everything else that everybody mentioned is the ability to nudge an AI system in a particular direction by manipulating the raw inputs. It's the kind of thing that a human would go, no, I shouldn't do that action, but a machine might not know any better if it was never trained on it or something quite unusual for it. To try to end on the good news piece though, and to Dr. Liu's point, sort of, I think the ability for AI to respond at machine speed is necessary to operate many of the systems we have today. You can't fly a modern fighter jet without a computer, and our other systems are going in the same direction. So AI has the promise of controlling those systems in a way that helps save lives and improve humanity.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all. I've been watching the chat and seen that Abdul has been doing heroic work trying to answer some of the more specific questions. But we did get one question left in the chat at the very end that I think would be great for the panel to reflect on, and we have 4 minutes left in this session. So I'll ask you to time your answers appropriately. But who feels like jumping in first on how will the SolarWinds episode impact investor and customer scrutiny on early stage software startups? Any advice to startups? I think that ties in nicely with our transition of research theme.
So, I mean, I'll jump in. I think what it does is it points to opportunities for startups, to, jump in here and come up with new techniques that deal with these kinds of supply chain attacks. And they're not only, I mean, in software, but, one of the things, and again, we've read about this in this newspaper, supply chain attacks on hardware, our chips compromised, all these things. And these are really tough problems. But it also means that if somebody can come up with good solutions, it's a great, I would invest in a company that was, had some good ideas, here. So I think, you can look at it as an opportunity, for, building, companies that address, important needs.
Yeah, just to follow up with that, yeah, it's an opportunity, and I also see that as a lesson, right, to everybody. Security is an investment, it's a cost to any company, and for startups, you got to really carefully manage your available financial funds, to make the right investment. But it's a lesson here, right? If you do not make the right investment on the security side, then there is a consequence. So that's something that the startups should be aware of. Anything
else to add, Jim?
Yeah, just quickly, I think from the startup's point of view, it means you don't want to be a SolarWinds, especially if you're fragile without a strong customer base, that you're going to have to take some of those precautions, and those are markets for the research that Jack and others have mentioned.
Fantastic. All right. Well, we are at time, so I'd like to thank the panelists and Abdul for the great presentation and turn it back over to Louise to close us out.
Okay, so let me thank you then, Laura, for moderating this great panel. Again, thank you all the participants. Abdul, thank you for answering the more technical questions in the Q&A. And then all our participants, I would like to, again, thank you for joining us today, but also invite you to visit our website at cyberinitiative.org so that you stay connected to us and informed about this sort of event, which we hold every so often. So thank you all. Have a great day, and hopefully I'll be seeing you soon.